Good afternoon and welcome to episode number 83 of the Inside the FLX podcast presented by FingerLakes1.com. Today we're joined by Dr. Tim Dennis, Chairman of the Yates County Legislature. Tim, thanks a lot for being here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Josh.
So election season is over. I'm sure you guys are breathing a sigh of relief now that you can get back to thinking about business and everything like that. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with politics.
Well, that's a bit of a story. I had never had any intention of getting this involved. But we moved to Yates County, my wife and I and our family, in early 1970 and established our veterinary practice, which grew into Eastview Veterinary Clinic in Penn Yan. And over the years, I became aware of how vibrant a community we were in and how much I was benefiting from being in that environment. And then I realized maybe I should start giving some back. I had kids in school. I was really interested in the school system. I was on the Board of Education for several years in the late 80s to the mid-90s. Got a good feel for budgeting, for how municipalities could be managed. Kind of stepped aside, went back into heavy-duty practice from that, always was in heavy-duty practice. After I retired from practice, or as I was contemplating retirement, I also thought, gee, I really care a lot about this community. And Mike Briggs was on the Yates County Legislature from District 2. Mike announced he wasn't going to run for re-election. He decided he was going to start a bank. And you're probably familiar with Mr. Briggs and his new bank. So that's when I decided to run for the legislature, and that would have been in 2007. The election was in 2007. I first started in 2008. And since then, kind of came up through the steps to chairman of finance, and then 4 years ago was elected chairman of the legislature.
Now, obviously, being chairman of the legislature, big responsibility. Talk to us a little bit about what that part of the experience has been like for you.
Well, as chairman, I had already been on the board for 4 years. I had served under two different chairmen, Bob Malter and Taylor Fitch. Learned an awfully lot from both of them. However, as a result of the election of 2013, they were no longer on the board, and so I kind of decided it was my turn to step up and offer some leadership. The job is a lot more than I thought it was going to be. It really is an everyday job, several hours every day. We went for a period of almost a year without a county administrator, and during that period, it was all day, every day while I handled that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of course, official duties, signatory duties, that type of thing, and a lot of coordinating efforts. I have a lot of good people around me, so it makes it pretty easy.
Now, speak to us a little bit, if you could, about the importance of it. You just mentioned how much more work you had to do when the county was seeking out an administrator. How important is that type of role for a municipality, especially a large one when you're talking about a county?
Well, of course, Yates County is not a large county, but we still we have 250 or so full-time employees, mm-hmm. $43 million budget. That something of that scale needs professional management. And even though I had a lot of experience managing a small business and also experience on the Board of Education, it really does need full-time administrative managerial oversight, and it's just the way it needs to be handled.
Now, election season is over. Were there any surprises? I just want to get sort of your first glance thoughts now that everything is behind you. Obviously, moving forward into a new year, possibly new faces, old faces return. What's that transition like as the leader of a large governing body?
Well, that's interesting because just before I came over here today, I was getting ready to reach out and contact the 3 newly elected county legislators to help make them feel comfortable, to get them in and start briefing them on what the issues are that are coming up. See if I could answer questions for them, make them feel more comfortable. And I've also talked with our county administrator and the clerk of our legislature, and they both also are working on that. We did have we have 3 incoming new legislators. There was 1 seat that was vacant, and then we have 2 more newly electeds that incumbents were upset in the primary. So that was a bit of a surprise, but over the years, a turnover of about 3 on a body of 14 is about what we have.
Right. Now, budget season, of course, any update you can give us and where you guys stand in the process, what some of the challenges you guys have seen so far, and what some of the things you're looking forward to tackling in the 2018 budget.
Okay, well, you happen to give me a softball pitch there, because we just last week got done with our 2-day budget workshop, and we have adopted a tentative budget for 2018. We're going to have a public hearing Thursday, November 16th in the chambers of the Yates County Legislature for our public hearing on that budget, and hopefully adopt that budget that night. The budget is, I think, a very comfortable budget for everybody that's involved. Our increase in our property tax levy, which is what everybody wants to talk about, is less than 1%. Our tax levy is a little over $16 million. It's about $16.1 million. Our potential New York State tax cap, after you went through that complicated formula, could have been upwards of around $400,000, or about 3%. But we're well underneath that. So that's the tax levy. The tax rate, which if there's not been any change in your assessment, is what affects your tax bill, is actually going down. It's going down about 1%. And this will be the 4th year in a row our tax rate has gone down.
Now, speaking to that a little bit, how much of a challenge is it balancing the tax control with still making sure essential services and all the responsibility that the county has is covered appropriately?
Well, it truly is a balancing act. We've got some very, very good people working for us, and I would start with mentioning our budget director and treasurer, Noni Flynn. So this will be her 3rd budget that she's presented. And she comes to the legislature, gets guidelines, where do we want to bring this in. She works for months with department heads and agencies to see that we can come in close to that. Where there are decisions with related to policy and adding or subtracting personnel, she leaves those decisions up to the budget, on the budget up to the legislature themselves. But she's done a very good job of it. The biggest issue that we have in county budgets is there's a lot of it we don't have control over. And some of it we can't even budget for, although we don't have control over it. And some of those things are, for instance, if you have minors in foster homes who end up having to be institutionalized, that can run into several $100,000 a year for that. The community colleges, we pay supposedly 1/3 of the cost of community college for our students. We don't know what that rate's going to be because it's on the state fiscal year, not on our fiscal year.
Right.
And that can vary. So there are several things like that that can really make budgeting difficult. One of the things we did last year was we established a tax stabilization fund. And it's not a lot of money, but, well, it is a lot of money, but in relation to 43 million or 16 million, it's not. But we have $500,000 in a tax stabilization reserve fund. And in a coming year, should we get one of those unforeseen things that throws our budget out of whack, we can use that to offset that so that there's not a big jump in the property tax levy for the next year.
Now, I was going through, it looked, I believe it was the preliminary budget, just what I had found over the last few weeks, and I thought it was interesting. It looked like something like a little north of 60% of the budget was dedicated to items like you were describing that are completely out of your control, unfunded mandates, as
Exactly.
the buzzword would be.
Right.
That has to be incredibly, incredibly frustrating, because I know it seems like in every single county body, whether it's a board of supervisors or a legislature, is saying, whoa, please, Albany, stop. Do you guys feel the same? Do you feel like there's hope?
Well, we do. We're 25% of our tax levy is a check that we write to the state for Medicaid. And that puts us a little unique from some counties that their entire property tax levy goes to Medicaid. So we're in a little better position than some on that. But there are a good many of those things that we don't have any control over, and it's very difficult. There's a couple things coming down the road. New York State has pledged they will make us whole on them. With apologies to those in Albany, us in county government remain skeptical. And
understandably so.
Raise the age. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
Yep.
But that's a term that refers to how 16 and 17-year-olds are treated in court.
Yep.
And New York probably does need to catch up with the rest of the country in that regard. However, there's going to be additional expenses. New York State has pledged to us that if we can document those additional expenses and remain within the tax cap, that they will reimburse us for the increase in expense. The term is they'll reimburse. We have to spend the money up front.
Right.
And then apply for it and wait for it to be reimbursed. We don't know exactly how that's going to work. If it's like most things that come out of Albany, I don't think they know how it's going to work. But now, again, my apologies to those in Albany.
Right. Now, another one of those items that was sort of seemed like a hallmark that the governor was very proud of it, the Shared Services Initiative. Was that something you guys pushed forward and tried to get done this year, or were you one of the counties that held off and one of the bodies that said, we'll do it again next year, but right now on short notice we're not going to push for it?
Well, yes and no. How's that for a good political
I like
answer? We're, in the grand scope of things, as counties goes, quite small. And we have 9 towns, 4 villages, and 25,000 people. So when we took a look at that and where the opportunities were, and fortunately we had a county administrator in place, and by state law the county administrator or county manager or executive was the chair of that shared services panel. And they identified a couple things that they really wanted to try to work on to see if there could be some additional savings from sharing services beyond what we already do. And we've documented a couple times, I can't put a dollar figure on it right now, but the amount of services shared with the county and towns and villages, between towns, between villages, we're all very lean, and we're already doing almost all of that. There were 2 things we're going to try to focus on. One was health insurance for employees of municipalities, and the other was centralizing of local courts. And the time frame was such, neither one of those could be done in that very short time frame.
Right.
So we submitted a report. The Department of State has our report. The good news is that committee is still in place, and they're still working on particularly the health insurance side of it. Kind of interested in health insurance consortiums, such as Tompkins County has put together, and we're seeing if we can join one or perhaps get enough interest to create one or something. But that's not something you do in a couple of months.
Exactly. So one of the interesting little results of Tuesday's election. I just want to get your thoughts on the vote in Barrington to become a quote-unquote wet community. It seemed immediately after the results came in, we had to actually do some research because we couldn't even really believe that in 2017 there were still partially dry, only under certain circumstances left in New York State. But obviously Barrington was one of them. I just kind of wanted to get your reaction to that.
Well, I pretty well stayed out of that. That's Barrington's business. Right. But of course it was the situation with the establishment down along the lake was pretty well documented. All three propositions passed within the Barrington vote, and I think that'll be taken care of. One of the things that's unique to New York is home rule, and we do have a lot of home rule, and we rule by towns, right. And it's up to towns how they want to be treated in that regard. In Yates County today, with the number of wineries that we have, and now the number of craft breweries we have, there's not much dry space left.
So to that end, actually, great segue right there, because I wanted to get your opinion, your take on the economic development that's happening around all of the lakes, Seneca Lake, Cuca Lake, all through the Finger Lakes. It's got to be a good sign, and it has to help you guys because you legislate by what's happening, and if good things are happening, you guys can do more good things.
We have a lot of good things happening, and I'm really excited, and a lot of us are really excited about the potential. We're coming alive, and it isn't just based around the lake or the wine or the breweries or the local produce. It's all of that together, and just the quality of life that we have. But I've served on the board of our IDA, Finger Lakes Economic Development Center. I've worked very closely as chairman with Steve Griffin over there, and he's just a great champion of Yates County and the Finger Lakes and what's going on. And that agency and ours work very well together. We've identified some issues that we want to keep what started, keep it moving. Part of the deal with the Finger Lakes Economic Development Center is people with some vision and with enthusiasm. And our IDA is a little bit unique to some in that while they're franchised by the county government, we put no direct dollars into the IDA. They stand alone on their own. They run their own budget. We did support them for a few years when the Empire Zones were first created, and they had to hire additional staff to manage the Empire Zone. But they do a lot of good work, and they're our partner.
Now, to that end, obviously, broadband expansion has been one of the big headlines the last couple of months in Yates County, and it really seems like, I believe you guys joined with Schuyler County, correct? Or one of the counties south of you, working to at least study what can be done to create a little more access. Talk to us about that.
Okay, well, you're hitting me where one of my things that I'm really pushing on. When I became chairman of the legislature, we had just received a $2.4 million grant from New York State Economic Development to develop what's called a dark fiber ring. We ended up putting about 68 to 72 miles of dark fiber around the county, and then we've gone about joining with Southern Tier Network based in Corning, and they were actually a partner, and they're a partner with us in our dark fiber network, and that's up and running, and it's doing well. However, that only goes where it goes, and we have a lot of people who need broadband access off the main road. The dark fiber, we liken it to a toll highway. You can run a highway right through the middle of town. If there's no interchanges, it doesn't do you much good. So we need carriers, we need interchanges. So we've partnered with Steuben County, as a matter of fact, in what's called a crowd fiber project. And thank you for giving me the chance to push that. It's going on right now. It's going to go on for about the next 6 weeks. And we're trying to get through the schools, through service clubs, through wherever we can in our communities for people to log on and to say, this is what I have for broadband access. This is what I need. In today's world, today's economy, this is the equivalent of rural electrification or CHIPS money to build highways, anything else. It's another utility that directly relates to the viability of our businesses and the quality of life in our homes. I'm really tied to this.
Now, it's interesting you mention it in that light, because it does seem like there is a push to treat this like any other piece of infrastructure regionally. That said, like any county, like any rural community, it seems like protecting and upgrading and fixing the already aging infrastructure that exists is another big part of the budget process and how you guys work on a daily basis. What kind of headway are you guys making in that regard to make sure that the water, the sewer, the everything else is being taken care of too along the way while you're bringing the county into 2018?
Yeah, well, that's another good question. And you know, Yates County is very well managed, and we're in a very good position. We have 180 miles of roads that we're responsible for. And during the budget crunch following the 2008-9 economic distress, we had to cut back on the number of roads that we were rehabilitating every year. So there was 1 or 2 years we only did 5 or 6 miles of roads a year. And at that rate, you're expecting a road to last 30 years. Well, we all know that's not going to happen.
Right.
So for 2018, we've budgeted to rehabilitate about 10 or 11 miles of road. And we're trying to catch up from where we were, but that puts those roads into a 15 or 18-year life, which is more reasonable. After they're rehabilitated, a number of years out, we do crack sealings, we do tar and chips on top of them. But if you drive our county roads, and in my veterinary practice, I drove in 4 or 5 counties. Yates County's roads, the county-owned roads, are generally as good or better than anybody's. Now, another side of that is bridges. And, of course, we all know that that's a big deal. We are in very, very good shape with our bridges. Right now, we only have 4 bridges that are going to be coming up for attention within the next few years. We've already got one of those planned to be rebuilt next year. We've got some ideas on how to go forward with other ones. We just opened up a new bridge last week. It's on a little traveled road. It's called the Valley View Road, Valley View Bridge in the town of Middlesex. And we redid that one with laminated timbers. And it's estimated to have a 40 to 50 year life. And it was about a third the cost of going with a full new bridge. So we're not afraid to try things. We've got very good managers. We're trying to be good stewards of our infrastructure. We've got other infrastructure problems. Now, you mentioned water and sewer. Yates County government is in a very good place. We are not in the water and sewer business, which is a good place to be. Is that
so? Some counties are, some counties aren't.
Exactly.
But it seems the consensus seems to be, even from some of those who are in the business, we don't want to be.
Yeah. Well, we're going to try not to be, but we are very supportive. There's a push for new water districts in the town of Torrey down along Route 14. We're very supportive of that. We're also supportive of getting a sewer extension along the Bath Road. We own our airport. We have a very viable airport. We're waiting for a grant from New York State DOT to expand sewer to that airport because we've got some businesses that would like to expand up there. So, but even that will not be Yates County Sewer. It'll be town of Milo.
Right.
So we're not in that position. We do have aging infrastructure that we're really in fact, starting next week, going to be looking at the two main ones are our jail and our highway facilities.
Right.
And we've had engineering studies done on both of those over the last 10 years. We didn't have any money or capability of doing anything, but we had the studies. We had a major office building and courthouse building project in early this century, and those bonds are going to be paid off in a couple of years. So we're starting to look at what can we do, particularly in the jail and the highway. And we have the National Institute of Corrections. A federal agency is sending a contractor up here next week. They're going to be spending 3 days analyzing our jail, what we can do perhaps to upgrade it, what we can do to make it more efficient. If we're going to do anything beyond that, what would those options be and what would they look like? I'd like to make it clear that in local politics and local coffee talk, there's talk about the legislature is bent on building a brand new jail, and that is far from the truth. We're more interested in what can we do with a worn-out, inefficient jail to get moving forward on it. The highway buildings, it's interesting, those go back to the 50s, and our crews actually made the cinder blocks, the cement blocks, and laid them up to build those buildings in the 50s. So that tells you how enterprising we are in Yates County, and also how aged those are, and it's time to do something with them as well.
Now, to that end, how much of it is, you guys looking and saying, hey, it's great that we have these facilities that can still be used after this long, but they weren't designed to last this long. So, we have to start looking at these options. At what point do you guys kind of say, okay, we have to buckle down and we have to start looking at these things?
Well, we're at that point right now.
Right.
We obviously looked at them earlier, but weren't in a financial position to do anything about it. We had a lot of debt with the new office building and the new courthouse. So you got to get yourself in a financial position before you do that. We are, of nature, our population, very conservative. We're not going to take on additional debt until we pay off what we've got. And it would be nice if we could get through some of these coming infrastructure issues with a minimal amount of debt. That's really what our goal is.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in today and talking to us about these issues. We'll have you in again probably in the next few months to talk more about what 2018 is going to shape up and look like for you guys.
Josh, it's been great, and I like to bring the Yates County story wherever I can.
Excellent. Well, that's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Dr. Dennis, our listeners, and of course, FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum, Channel 12, and it's available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.